My name is Hannah Mercer. I am 29 years old, and on the morning of my husband's funeral, I learned what real betrayal feels like, the kind that does not just bruise the heart, but cracks the floor beneath your feet. Nathan Carter. My husband of 6 years had been gone for exactly 4 days, and I was still moving through the world as if underwater, every breath tight, every step heavy, every sound too loud. I had barely slept since the night the police knocked on my door and told me that Nathan's car had been found crushed against a guardrail outside Portland, the rain-soaked highway shimmering under flashing red and blue lights. I was standing beside his closed casket in the chapel when the first ripple of unease moved through the crowd, a soft shift of murmuring that felt like the air tightening around my ribs. I turned, thinking maybe another relative had arrived late. But instead, I saw my younger sister Emily striding down the aisle as if she owned the room, her chin high, her eyes bright with something that did not look remotely like grief. She had skipped every moment of the past 4 days, ignored every call, offered no condolences, and now she appeared dressed in a fitted black dress that looked more suited for a cocktail party than a funeral, and in her arms she carried her infant son, a child she had never allowed Nathan or me to meet. The chapel fell silent as she stopped beside the casket and turned to face everyone. My mother and stepmother gasped softly behind me. My stepmother, Linda, whispered, "Hannah, do something," but I could not. I was frozen, watching Emily climb onto the emotional stage she had clearly rehearsed for. My sister's voice lifted through the stillness. "I think all of you deserve to know the truth," she said, and my stomach tightened in a way I could not explain. "This is Nathan's son." Every head turned toward the baby, then toward me, then back to her, the shock moving in waves. I felt heat rising up my neck, not from embarrassment or fear, but from the instinctive knowledge that whatever Emily was doing, it was planned, calculated, cruel. She continued confidently, as if she had been waiting years to deliver this blow. "Nathan and I had an affair. He told me he felt trapped and unhappy, and that he needed real connection. Hannah wasn't giving him a family, so he came to me." My vision blurred for a moment. The walls pulsed. Somewhere, someone whispered, "Oh my God!" But Emily wasn't finished. She reached into her diaper bag and pulled out a crisp white envelope. Inside, she announced triumphantly, is Nathan's updated will. He left half of everything to his son, half the house, half the savings, half the estate. He wanted to do right by us. She held up the document like a trophy, and a shiver of disgust crawled across the room. People stared at me with pity, with morbid curiosity, with the same stunned confusion I felt the moment the officers told me Nathan was gone. But something inside me, something deeper than shock, deeper than pain, began to crack open, not in devastation, but in dark, disbelieving clarity. Because there was one thing Emily did not know, one thing that made her entire performance not only vicious, but impossible. Nathan could not have fathered her baby. Not 2 years after the surgery that changed everything, and as she stood there proudly clutching her lie as the chapel held its breath, waiting for me to break all I could think was this: my sister had no idea what was coming next. I met Nathan Carter long before my life became a battlefield between grief and betrayal, back when I was 22 and still believed that kindness guaranteed safety, that love made people better instead of giving others reasons to destroy you. I was working part-time at a community art center in Portland, helping set up an exhibit for a fundraiser supporting children with chronic illnesses, and Nathan was volunteering as the event's tech coordinator, troubleshooting projectors and wiring speakers with the easy confidence of someone who understood machinery far better than human chaos. He was handsome in a quiet way, the kind of man who did not dominate a room but steadied it with warm eyes that crinkled when he smiled, and a calmness that made me feel grounded even before I knew his name. He asked if I needed help hanging a heavy frame, and when he reached up beside me, his arm brushing mine, I felt something inside my chest shift, subtle but unmistakable, like the first tremor of a coming storm. Our first conversation was about paint textures and projector bulbs. Yet he listened to me as if every word mattered. That night, he walked me to my car because it was raining hard enough to blur the streetlights, and when the downpour broke against his shoulders, he laughed and said he didn't mind if it meant I got home dry. It took him 2 days to ask me out, and only one date for me to realize I was in trouble because I wasn't just interested in him, I was safe with him in a way I had never experienced in my own family. Nathan came from stability from a mother who asked about his day and a father who taught him to fix things instead of throwing them away. My own home life had been shaped by a stepmother, Linda, who believed love was conditional and attention was currency. She invested both exclusively in my younger sister Emily, whose dramatic moods and reckless choices were always forgiven, justified, excused, while I was expected to be understanding, responsible, quiet. Nathan saw that imbalance long before I admitted it, gently pointing out the way Emily dismissed my boundaries, the way Linda dismissed my feelings. He never pushed me to cut ties, only encouraged me to stand straighter, speak louder, want more. We married when I was 23, and for a while it felt like I had stepped into another universe. One where days were built on laughter instead of tension, where meals were shared without manipulation, where arguments ended with apologies instead of slammed doors. We bought a cedar-sided home outside Portland, a place with a wraparound porch and a backyard garden I planted with too much ambition and too little skill. And Nathan took pictures of every wilted tomato plant as if it were something precious. He worked as a software engineer, methodical and brilliant, while I taught art classes to middle schoolers, making just enough to feel proud without pretending I could ever match his income. He never cared about that. What he cared about was partnership, and he treated me like someone worth protecting, worth planning for, worth building a future with. When we started trying for a baby, he was the one who held my hand through late-night Google searches. Doctor visits, the crushing silence of negative tests. After a year of uncertainty, Nathan was diagnosed with a condition that required surgery, a procedure that included a vasectomy to prevent complications. He was devastated not for himself, but for me, apologizing through tears, as if biology were a choice, and I told him over and over that I didn't marry him for the possibility of children. I married him because he was home. And he was. He told me he would make sure I was always protected, that no matter what happened, no one would ever be able to hurt me again the way my family once did. I believed him. I clung to that belief so tightly that I didn't notice the cracks forming around me, the envy simmering in Emily's eyes whenever she looked at my marriage, the tension in Linda's voice whenever she compared our lives. I never imagined that the love Nathan gave me so freely would become the very thing my sister tried to weaponize against me. But on the day of his funeral, I finally understood something Nathan had sensed long before I did. Some people do not want your happiness. They want your undoing. And Emily had been waiting years for her chance. Hannah's resentment toward my family did not begin on the day she stormed into Nathan's funeral with her outrageous accusation. It had been fermenting for years in the quiet corners of my childhood, shaped by patterns so familiar I once mistook them for normal. My sister, Emily Mercer, was born 27 months after me, and from the moment she arrived, the household bent itself around her storms like trees leaning away from relentless wind. She cried louder, demanded more, charmed, effortlessly, manipulated instinctively, and every one of her impulses was indulged by our stepmother Linda, who entered our lives when I was 9 and Emily was 7. Linda believed Emily was delicate, misunderstood, emotionally fragile. I was sturdy, self-sufficient, the easy child, which in her language meant I required nothing and deserved even less. My father adored us both, but was too conflict-averse to disrupt Linda's favoritism. He mistook appeasement for harmony, and so the dynamic calcified. Emily exploded. Linda defended Dad, avoided, and I absorbed the fallout. By the time we reached adulthood, Emily had already cycled through 3 community colleges, 5 roommates, and a collection of jobs. She quit the moment someone asked her to follow a rule. She chased attention with the desperation of someone thirsty in a desert and sought it through increasingly reckless relationships. The latest was Derek Hansen, a 33-year-old construction worker with a short temper, a long arrest record, and a smirk that made my skin crawl. Emily insisted he was misunderstood, but I had seen the bruises she covered with makeup, the way she flinched when he raised his voice, and the way he looked at me like problems were things meant to be solved with intimidation. Nathan disliked him immediately, which only fueled Emily's resentment. She found ways to twist Nathan's caution into condescension, claiming he thought he was better than them and accusing me of becoming just as judgmental. The irony was that Emily herself judged Nathan more harshly than anyone. She envied him, envied the stability he represented, envied the way his love for me was steady and unconditional, something she had never experienced and often tried to sabotage. It started small. She would make comments about our home being too nice for people our age, hinting that Nathan must secretly resent being the primary breadwinner. She mocked my teaching job, insinuating that I had married up and that Nathan only tolerated my career because it made me seem harmless. When she became pregnant unexpectedly, my father tried to celebrate with the same enthusiasm he had shown at my wedding, but Linda immediately shifted into martyr mode, treating Emily as if pregnancy excused every bad decision she had ever made. I offered to help, as I always did, and Emily accepted my support with a smug satisfaction that made me nauseous. She never let me or Nathan near the father of her child, and whenever we asked about him, she became cagey, claiming he was not ready or still figuring things out. The truth was obvious. Derek had not changed, and Emily would rather lie than admit she was trapped in a relationship that frightened her. Meanwhile, Linda continued to feed Emily's entitlement. She insisted Emily deserved financial help, that my father should cover her rent, her medical bills, everything. When he hesitated, Linda said something that still echoes in my memory. "Hannah is fine. She has Nathan. Emily needs us more." That sentence sliced through me like ice. I was no longer a daughter, a person, or even a priority. I was a resource to be measured, a cushion between Emily and the consequences of her own life. Nathan told me gently one night that families like mine did not collapse suddenly. They eroded slowly until the cracks were too deep to ignore. He encouraged me to set boundaries, to say no, to pull back. But boundaries only work with people who respect them, and Emily saw every limit as a challenge. She wanted something of mine, my peace, my marriage, my stability, and each year the hunger in her eyes grew sharper. I did not understand then what she truly wanted. I did not understand what she was capable of. Not until the day she stood over Nathan's casket and tore open a wound she had been crafting for years. The fractures in my family did not become dangerous all at once. They widened slowly like a hairline crack in glass that spreads under pressure until the entire pane shatters with the slightest touch. For most of my 20s, I tried to pretend those fractures were manageable, that if I stayed patient and forgiving, things would remain tolerable. But nothing stays small in a family built on denial, and Emily's resentment toward me had been smoldering long before it burst into flames on the day of Nathan's funeral. The first real warning came 2 years ago at my father's birthday dinner. Emily arrived already half drunk, her cheeks flushed, her smile brittle. She oscillated between hugging me too tightly and glaring at me across the table as if my existence offended her. When Nathan complimented her dress, she twisted the remark into a complaint, saying he was patronizing her and that he probably thought she could not afford better. When I pulled her aside to calm her down, she slapped me across the face so suddenly I did not register the sting until my eyes watered. Nathan stepped between us instantly, his voice firm but controlled, and Emily exploded, accusing him of turning me against her. Linda rushed to protect Emily, scolding me for provoking her, even though I had done nothing but try to help. That night was the first time I saw Nathan genuinely angry, not at the slap, but at the way my pain was dismissed before I could even speak. After that, Emily's hostility took on a darker, more manipulative tone. She would corner me during family gatherings, whispering venom about how Nathan was too perfect, how men like him always had secrets, how I was foolish to trust anyone so completely. When I refused to take the bait, she escalated by bringing Derek into the picture more prominently. Derek was a walking storm cloud, unpredictable and loud, with a swagger that masked the insecurity simmering beneath his skin. He had a way of speaking to me that felt like a threat wrapped in sarcasm. Once, when he had been drinking heavily at a barbecue, he leaned in too close and murmured that Nathan should watch his back because accidents happened when men made the wrong enemies. Nathan brushed it off as drunken rambling, but I never forgot the way Derek's eyes lingered on him afterward, full of something sharp and mean. When Emily got pregnant, I hoped motherhood might soften her, might give her something healthier to cling to. Instead, she weaponized it. She claimed she needed money for medical bills, then rent, then repairs. My father tried to help, but Linda insisted he was not doing enough, pushing him to tighten every financial gap Emily created. Whenever I suggested Emily speak to a counselor or social worker, Linda accused me of judging her. And Emily? She smirked, fully aware that she held all the power in their distorted triangle. The worst moment came 3 months before Nathan's death, when I accidentally walked into the hallway of my parents' house and saw Derek gripping Emily's arm so hard his knuckles whitened. She tried to twist away, but he yanked her back, hissing at her through clenched teeth. When Derek noticed me, he let her go and laughed as if it were a harmless lover's spat. Emily, with a trembling smile, told me not to make things dramatic. Nathan wanted to intervene, but Emily threatened to accuse him of inappropriate behavior if he did. She weaponized fear the same way she weaponized sympathy. Looking back, I see that what happened at the funeral was not an impulsive act born of grief or desperation. It was one step in a long chain of small violences, emotional, psychological, and physical, that had been tightening around all of us for years. I just did not realize how tightly until the day the chain finally snapped. Nathan's death did not arrive like a sudden thunderclap. It crept into my life disguised as an ordinary evening, the kind you forget because nothing seems remarkable about it until everything becomes unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. It was raining, the steady Oregon kind of rain that never seems to fall hard but soaks through everything anyway. I had been sick for 2 days with a sinus infection, too congested to sleep, too achy to eat, and Nathan insisted on going out to get me a different medication because the one we had at home wasn't helping. I told him I would be fine until morning, but he kissed my forehead and said he wanted me to rest without feeling miserable. That was Nathan gentle in all the places life had been rough with me. He grabbed his jacket, smiled at me from the doorway, and said he would be back in 15 minutes. That was the last time I saw him alive. 20 minutes later, when my phone rang, I assumed it was Nathan asking whether he should grab soup on the way back. Instead, a dispatcher's voice told me there had been an accident on the highway, that my husband's car had been struck by a speeding pickup, and that emergency responders were still at the scene. My throat sealed shut. I remember grabbing my keys, running into the rain, driving too fast, praying too hard. When I arrived, the highway was washed in the glow of red and blue lights, the air sharp with the metallic smell of wet asphalt and gasoline. Nathan's car was unrecognizable, crushed against the guardrail as if a giant hand had folded it in half. A paramedic intercepted me before I reached the wreckage. I knew what he was going to say before he said it. The world tilted as he explained that Nathan had gone instantly, that there had been nothing anyone could do. I stood there long after they covered his body, long after traffic was rerouted, long after the rain had soaked through my clothes and chilled my bones. I felt like I had left my own body, watching a version of myself unravel from somewhere just above. In the days that followed, time warped. Meals went untouched, phone calls blurred. People came and went, offering condolences that bounced off the hollow space inside my chest. My father visited every day, awkward in his grief, while Linda fussed more about the funeral arrangements than about my emotional state. Emily, predictably, was nowhere. She sent a text that read, "Sorry for your loss," but never followed up. Derek did not appear either, which would have been a relief if not for a detail that gnawed at me even then. The pickup that hit Nathan had been dark blue. Derek drove a dark blue pickup. It could have been coincidence, and the police report said the driver fled the scene before anyone could identify him, but the unease clung to me like damp clothing. I told myself I was being paranoid, that grief distorted reason, that the world was not cruel enough to intertwine Emily's chaos with Nathan's death. It was easier to believe that than to confront the possibility that the people who had hurt me in small ways for years might have finally done something irreversible. Still, I could not shake the memory of Derek's earlier threat delivered with that mocking smirk. Accidents happen. 3 days before the funeral, I sat alone in the living room holding Nathan's jacket to my chest and felt a tremor of dread pulse through my body. Something about this tragedy did not add up, but I pushed the thought aside, forcing myself to focus on planning a service worthy of the man I loved. I didn't know then that the funeral would not be the end of my nightmare. It would be the beginning. On the morning of Nathan's funeral, the sky hung low and gray, the kind of oppressive cloud cover that made it feel as though the world itself was grieving with me. I woke up before dawn, not because I had slept, but because my body had reached the point where exhaustion no longer produced rest. I dressed slowly, touching each button on my black dress as if I needed to remind myself that time was still moving, that I was still here, even though it felt like half my life had been buried with Nathan the moment his car hit that guardrail. People began arriving at the chapel long before the service started. Old co-workers of Nathan's neighbors, my father, even distant relatives I barely recognized, pressed warm hands around mine and whispered condolences that dissolved as soon as they touched the surface of my grief. I stood near the front, staring at the polished wood of the casket, trying to take steady breaths, clinging to the thought that this moment was about honoring Nathan and nothing else. For a while it seemed possible. The service was somber and quiet. A violinist played the piece Nathan loved, the pastor spoke about the fragility of life, and I felt the first glimmer of something like peace settle into my chest. And then the doors at the back of the chapel burst open. The disturbance was immediate, like a ripple tearing through still water. Heads turned, whispers rose, shoulders stiffened. I turned too, and there she was. Emily. She walked down the aisle with theatrical precision, as if she were entering a stage rather than her brother-in-law's funeral. Her hair was styled in loose waves, her makeup flawless. Her black dress fitted like she had chosen it not for mourning, but for attention. In her arms, she carried her infant son, the child she had spent months hiding from me and Nathan, as if he were a secret weapon she would unleash when the timing was right. Today, apparently, was that moment. My stomach clenched, but I forced myself to stay still. People shifted subtly away from Emily as she passed, sensing a tension they could not name. My stepmother Linda sat up straighter, her gaze brightening in a way that made bile rise in my throat. She knew something. Or worse, she expected something. Emily reached the front of the chapel and stopped beside Nathan's casket, standing so close it felt like an intrusion, an act of disrespect so sharp it nearly stole my breath. She turned to face the mourners as if they had gathered here for her instead of the man lying silent beside her. "Thank you all for coming." Emily began, her voice ringing too loud, too confident, too rehearsed. I felt a cold prickle run down my spine. This past year has been full of difficult truths and painful secrets. She continued adjusting the baby in her arms, and I think Nathan would want those truths to be known today. A murmur swept through the room, confused, uneasy. My fingers tightened around the tissue in my hand until it tore. Emily looked directly at me then, and the triumph in her eyes made my knees weaken. "This is Nathan's son," she announced. The room gasped. Someone whispered my name in horror. Someone else cursed under their breath. My vision tunneled, but I forced myself to stay upright. Emily pressed on, feeding on the shock. "Nathan and I had an affair. He told me he felt trapped. He told me he wished he had chosen differently. He told me he wanted a family." Each lie landed like a stone thrown at my chest, but beneath the pain was something strange, a pulsing disbelief that bordered on dark amusement. She was so certain, so determined, so willing to shred her own integrity in front of 100 witnesses. Emily reached into her diaper bag and pulled out a crisp document pinched between her fingers like a winning lottery ticket. And here is his will updated before he died. He left half of everything to our son, half the house, half the savings, half the estate. He wanted to do right by us. She held it up high, letting everyone see the bold black signature at the bottom, the neat paragraphs, the official-looking stamp that was just convincing enough to fool people who had never dealt with real legal documents. My father shifted anxiously beside me, but Linda leaned forward with a proud, vindicated smile, as if Emily had just exposed some great injustice I had been hiding. The whispers turned sharper now, not just pitying, but speculative. The perfect marriage, the loyal husband, the happy couple. Maybe none of it had been real. Maybe Hannah had been blind. Maybe Nathan had been miserable. Emily drank in their confusion like fuel. She angled the baby toward the crowd, letting them see his dark hair, his round cheeks. People stared, and for a moment, even grief bowed to spectacle. But I felt no urge to collapse, no urge to scream, no urge to run. Instead, something inside me clicked into place, a cold and astonishing clarity. Nathan's vasectomy had been successful. He could not have fathered a child. Not Emily's. Not anyone's. Not after the surgery that had broken his heart and tightened our bond. In the will she clutched like a trophy, Nathan had updated his real will with our attorney. He had even joked about keeping receipts for the apocalypse. So as Emily basked in her moment of stolen glory, certain she had destroyed me, I stared back at her with a stillness she mistook for devastation. But it was something else. Knowledge. Certainty. Resolve. Emily thought she had delivered her final blow. She had no idea she had just triggered the war. Long before Emily stood in that chapel clutching her forged will and spinning fantasies about an affair that never happened, Nathan had already sensed the danger she represented. Not the theatrical kind she flaunted in public, but the quieter, more insidious kind that slithered beneath family dynamics and waited for moments of weakness to strike. The first real warning came almost 2 years before his death during a dinner at our home. I had stepped outside to take a long work call, and when I returned, the room felt wrong. Taut, charged. Emily was sitting too close to Nathan, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Her laugh too breathy, her smile too practiced. Nathan's chair was angled away from her, his expression caught somewhere between discomfort and politeness. He told me later that Emily had complimented him in ways no sister-in-law should, tracing her fingers along his sleeve, and saying he deserved someone who could truly appreciate him, someone who didn't hold him back. Nathan shut it down immediately, but Emily had laughed, dismissing her own behavior as harmless fun, as if violating boundaries were a game she expected everyone to play by her rules. After that, Nathan began noticing patterns I had brushed aside for years. Emily waiting until I left the room to touch his shoulder. Emily sending him late-night messages that tiptoed the line between needy and flirtatious. Emily showing up at his workplace unannounced with flimsy excuses about being in the neighborhood. He told me each time because secrecy was not in his nature, but the cumulative weight of these moments settled like a stone in my stomach. Nathan encouraged me to set firmer boundaries with her. I tried, but boundaries only work with people who believe they should exist. Emily treated mine like obstacles to be climbed over. Then the medical crisis happened. After months of trying to conceive, Nathan's urologist delivered the news that a surgery was necessary to correct a condition that had worsened unexpectedly. The vasectomy was not optional. The alternative was long-term pain and possible complications that could threaten his health. Nathan grieved the loss of biological fatherhood quietly, privately. I grieved with him. We comforted each other, choosing love over disappointment. But Emily's behavior made that grief feel unsafe. When she found out because Linda had pried, and I had made the mistake of answering honestly, Emily smirked when she thought I wasn't looking as if my pain were a prize she had finally won. Nathan, seeing how exposed we were, decided it was time to protect us in ways my family never had. He scheduled a meeting with an attorney, Carter Brooks, a man he trusted deeply. I went with him, sitting beside him as he laid out everything with calm precision: Emily's inappropriate behavior, Derek's threats, Linda's manipulation, and the medical reality that made any claim of future paternity impossible. Carter listened carefully, nodding with a seriousness that suggested he had seen too many families implode over far less. He advised Nathan to document everything, to update his will, to store copies of medical records securely, and to ensure that I would be legally and financially protected should anything ever happen to him. Nathan followed every instruction. He kept a journal recording each uncomfortable encounter, not because he feared Emily romantically, but because he feared what she might do if she ever became desperate. He saved her text messages, even the ones she deleted from her side. He kept printed emails receipts, appointment confirmations from his doctor, and a notarized copy of his updated will. Together, we rented a safety deposit box at our bank. Nathan placed all the documents inside with a quiet seriousness that broke my heart. When he closed the lid, he said something I didn't understand at the time. "I don't think Emily's done, Hannah. People like her don't stop until someone forces them to." I told him he was overthinking that Emily was selfish and chaotic, but not dangerous. I said those words with so much certainty, so much naive faith in family ties, that sometimes I still hear them echoing in my mind like a warning I failed to heed. Nathan gave me a sad smile and kissed my forehead. "I just want you to be safe," he said. I want you to have the truth when you need it. And now, as I stood in the chapel on the day of his funeral watching Emily's story crumble, the moment it met the reality Nathan had prepared for, I felt a surge of gratitude mingled with grief. Nathan had known. He had seen the storm long before I felt its first drop. He had built the shelter I would one day need to survive it. And Emily, in her arrogance, had walked straight into the trap of her own lies, never imagining that Nathan had already written the ending long before she tried to rewrite the beginning. Hannah left the chapel that day feeling less like a grieving widow and more like someone standing on the edge of a cliff staring down at the pieces of a truth she had not yet assembled. Emily's accusation wasn't just cruel, it was calculated, and the forged will meant she had either acted alone with shocking confidence or had help from someone with fewer moral breaks than she had ever possessed, and there was only one person in Emily's orbit who fit that description: Derek. The name alone made my skin crawl as I drove to the office of Carter Brooks the morning after the funeral. Carter had been Nathan's attorney for years, the kind of man whose calm presence could steady even the most chaotic room. When he opened the door and saw my face, he didn't offer condolences or platitudes. He simply guided me to a chair and asked me to tell him everything. And I did. Every word Emily had said. The forged document, the way she waved it around like a trophy, the years of boundary pushing, the threats from Derek, the dark blue pickup that had appeared in my nightmares long before the police report described a similar one fleeing the scene of Nathan's crash. Carter listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes in his precise handwriting. When I finished, he leaned back and exhaled a slow, deliberate breath. Hannah, what your sister presented is not just fraudulent. It's reckless and extremely amateur. This would take an expert about 10 minutes to dismantle in court. He spread the so-called will on the table, pointing out misaligned margins, incorrect legal phrasing, and a signature that was close enough to Nathan's to fool someone emotional, but nowhere near convincing under scrutiny. This isn't just illegal, he said, tapping the page. It's desperate. That word stuck with me long after he said it. Desperate. Emily had always been impulsive, jealous, volatile. But desperate was new. Desperate meant cornered. Desperate meant dangerous. Carter urged me to retrieve everything from the safety deposit box Nathan and I had prepared. When I returned with the thick folder of documents, he reviewed each one in silence. Nathan's real will, the notarization, the surgery reports, the vasectomy, confirmation, printed text messages from Emily, even the journal entries documenting every inappropriate encounter. Carter tapped the medical records meaningfully. This alone destroys her entire claim, but if she brought a forged will to a public event full of witnesses, she's crossed into felony territory. She could face real jail time. I nodded, but the truth was a part of me still clung to the hope that Emily had acted alone, that she had become so consumed by resentment that she fabricated everything by herself, that Derek had nothing to do with the forged will, that the accident had been just that, an accident. But hope is a fragile thing when weighed against instinct, and my instinct told me Emily wasn't capable of orchestrating a scheme this elaborate without someone whispering instructions behind her shoulder. Carter must have seen the conflict in my expression because he folded his hands and said gently, Hannah, you need someone who can go deeper than I can. You need an investigator. That was how I found myself sitting across from Marshall Green later that afternoon. Marshall was a retired private investigator in his early 60s with the weary expression of a man who had seen every kind of human ugliness twice. He listened with the detached, analytical calm of someone who did not shock easily. When I finished explaining the situation, he nodded slowly. Your sister is lying, that much is obvious. But lies like this don't happen in a vacuum. Someone helped her, someone motivated her, and someone stands to gain more than she does. His words sent a chill skittering across my skin. Marshall began his investigation immediately. Within 48 hours, he returned with findings that left me reeling. Emily was drowning financially. She had racked up nearly $80,000 in debt. Credit cards, payday loans, medical bills from the pregnancy she claimed she was handling fine. Her landlord had filed eviction papers after 4 months of unpaid rent. She had applied for multiple personal loans in the last 6 weeks, all denied. And then there were the messages. dozens of them pulled from Emily's cloud backup after Marshall legally obtained access through open-source digital analysis. Conversations between Emily and a woman named Tessa, someone I vaguely remembered from Emily's social circle, a woman whose hobbies included stirring chaos like it was a competitive sport. One message made my heart lodge in my throat. The funeral is perfect timing. If Hannah breaks down, she won't fight the will. And even if she does, Derek says we can handle it. Another, that house is worth over $500,000. Even if I just get a piece, I'll finally be free. But the worst message was the one that connected everything I had feared. Tessa. Did Derek do it, Emily? He said it wasn't on purpose, but maybe this is our chance. My breath stuttered in my chest. Marshall watched me carefully. The pickup involved in Nathan's accident was dark blue. Derek drives a dark blue pickup. He paused to let the implications settle. The police assumed the driver was drunk and panicked, but an intentional hit and run. That's a different investigation entirely. My pulse pounded so hard it ached. Every memory of Derek's glare, every threat, every moment Emily had dismissed his temper, they all snapped into horrifying clarity. Marshall wasn't done. I also traced this. He slid a printed image toward me and edited document file with Derek's username in the metadata. The fake will had been created on his computer, not Emily's, not by accident, by design. I felt something inside me break. Not grief this time, but the last shard of illusion that my sister had merely been selfish, misguided, or manipulated. She had been complicit. She had weaponized my grief. She had used Nathan's death, whether accidental or not, as an opportunity to steal everything he had worked for. And Derek, with his violence and rage and jealousy, had given her the means. As Marshall packed his files, he looked at me with solemn certainty. Whatever you decide to do next, Hannah, know this. They have already declared war on you. The only question now is how you want to fight back. By the time Marshall finished laying out every piece of evidence, I felt as if the world had tipped on its axis. Grief and betrayal had been heavy enough to carry, but now I was holding something colder, sharper, and far more dangerous. The knowledge that Emily and Derek had not only forged a will, but might have played a role accidental or otherwise in the crash that killed Nathan. I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles blanched. Nathan had always said that Emily wouldn't stop until someone made her. Now I finally understood what he meant, and I intended to make her stop, for good, but I refused to confront her in anger. Anger gave her room to twist the narrative. Anger allowed her to play the victim. Facts were my weapon, and facts left no room for her theatrics. The next morning, I called Emily. She sounded smug breezy, as if she had already mentally moved into my home. I want to talk, I said calmly. Can you come to my house? Just Derek, no baby. She hesitated, but arrogance overruled caution. Of course. 2:00. I'll bring the will. Her voice carried the confidence of someone who believed she had already won. She had no idea the ground beneath her was moments away from collapsing. I spent the hours before her arrival preparing not emotionally but strategically. I laid everything out on the dining table. Marshall's printed reports, screenshots of messages, Nathan's legitimate will, the vasectomy records, photos of Derek's blue pickup near the accident site taken by a traffic cam Marshall had uncovered, and a small digital recorder. When the doorbell rang exactly at 2, I inhaled deeply and opened the door. Emily stood there looking irritatingly composed, wearing a crisp white blouse and heels that clicked confidently against the floor as she walked inside. She surveyed the documents spread across the table, mistaking them for paperwork she believed she would soon claim as hers. "You've calmed down," she said with a satisfied smile. "Good. We can handle this like adults." I gestured for her to sit. "Before we start," I said evenly, "I want to record our conversation. For clarity." She shrugged. "Sure. Not like I have anything to hide." I nearly laughed at the irony. I started by sliding her forged will to the center of the table. She brightened. "See? He signed it." I cut her off. "Emily, this is a felony." Her smile faltered. "What?" I tapped the bottom corner. created on Derek Hansen's work laptop 2 weeks before Nathan died. Her cheeks drained of color. I continued keeping my voice clinical controlled. That alone is enough to charge you both with fraud. Add in witnesses at the funeral. You won't be able to pretend this was a misunderstanding. Emily swallowed hard. Hannah, wait! But I wasn't finished. I slid the vasectomy file toward her next. Nathan's medical records, confirmed by follow-up testing. He couldn't have fathered your baby or anyone else's. Not 2 years after this procedure. Emily stared at the page like it was written in a foreign language. That's not possible. He told me. He told you nothing. I snapped. Because he never touched you. Because he rejected every advance you made. We sat in silence for a long moment. Emily looked at the documents at her own reflection in the glossy plastic of the folder covers, and finally, at me. Her voice cracked. I didn't know about the surgery. I didn't let her finish. I pushed another stack of papers toward her screenshots of her messages with Tessa. Lines highlighted in yellow. The funeral is perfect timing. If I get a piece of the house, I'll finally be free. Derek says we can handle it. Emily's eyes widened in horror. How did you... Doesn't matter, I cut in. What matters is that you planned to use Nathan's death to steal my home. My voice remained calm, but inside, something fierce was coiling. I leaned forward. And you almost pulled it off. She shook her head rapidly. Hannah, I was desperate. I raised my hand to silence her. You weren't just desperate. You were cruel. You humiliated me at Nathan's funeral. You lied about him. You lied about me. Your lies were so detailed, so vicious, so rehearsed, because you believed grief would make me weak enough to accept them. Emily's eyes welled, but I no longer mistook her tears for sincerity. She pressed her shaking hands to her face. I didn't mean for any of it to. Then I dropped the final document on the table. A printed still image. Derek's blue pickup. 5 blocks from where Nathan died, time-stamped 22 minutes before the crash. Emily's breath hitched. Her whole body froze. I watched her chest rise and fall in jagged motions like a trapped animal. Hannah, she whispered, please, don't say it. I didn't. She already knew. She didn't need me to say the words. Oh. Instead, I said quietly, the police are reopening the case. I expected denial, screaming accusations. But what came out of Emily instead was a soft, broken sound. Hannah, I swear, I didn't know he followed Nathan. I didn't know he... She buried her face in her shaking hands. I thought he just wanted to scare him. I didn't think my stomach twisted. I didn't know whether it was rage or heartbreak. Maybe both. She looked up at me, eyes red, desperate. I didn't kill him. Derek, he gets so angry I can't control him. I slammed my hand on the table. You brought him into this family. You let him near Nathan. You used him to threaten me. You made him believe he had something to gain by hurting my husband. Her whole body crumpled like paper. Hannah, please. I didn't want this. I didn't. I stood slowly, shaking with fury, so cold it felt like ice in my bloodstream. You didn't want consequences. That's not the same thing. The truth sat between us on the polished wood table. Ugly, undeniable, irreversible. Emily looked at the evidence at me at the floor, and then she whispered the one sentence that proved Nathan had been right all along. I didn't think he would actually die. My voice came out steady, eerily calm. You will give a full confession. To me, to the police, to everyone you humiliated at the funeral. And if you don't, I leaned in close enough for her to feel the weight of every word. I will make sure you spend the next decade learning what real consequences feel like. Emily didn't argue. She didn't scream. She didn't threaten. She simply nodded because for the first time in her life she had run out of games to play. She had finally lost. Telling my parents what Emily had done felt less like a conversation and more like preparing to detonate a controlled explosion. I knew the blast was inevitable. I just hoped to contain the shrapnel. My father and Linda arrived that evening after I called and asked them to come over. My father sounded worried. Linda sounded irritated, as if grief and betrayal were inconveniences I should schedule around her comfort. They stepped inside, shedding coats and expectations at the door. Expectations that Emily was troubled but harmless, that I was overreacting, that family loyalty could cover any wound if you layered it thick enough. Those illusions were minutes away from dying. "Please sit," I said, gesturing to the dining table where the documents still lay. My father's eyes flicked toward the folders nervously. Linda sat with her arms crossed already on defense. "Is this about Emily?" she asked. "She's been crying all afternoon." I nearly laughed. Of course she was crying. Manipulation was oxygen to her. "Yes," I replied. "It's about Emily and about Nathan." Their faces shifted. Linda stiffened. My father's shoulders sagged. I took a breath and began. I walked them through everything, carefully, clinically stripping away emotion so the truth would stand on its own. The forged will, the fabricated affair, the medical impossibility of Nathan fathering her child, the text messages, the financial desperation, the role Derek played, and finally the photo of his blue pickup near the site of Nathan's crash. By the time I finished, my father's hands were shaking. Linda's face had drained completely of color, though whether from shame or fear for Emily I couldn't tell. My father spoke first, his voice cracking. "Emily did this. She accused Nathan at his funeral." He looked stricken small, like a man who had just discovered his compass was broken. Linda, however, found her words in the wrong place entirely. She didn't mean harm. She insisted, leaning forward with sudden fervor. "You know how emotional she gets. She probably thought I slammed a folder shut and she flinched. No, she didn't think. She planned. She executed. She tried to steal Nathan's estate, destroy his reputation, and humiliate me. She used your willingness to excuse her behavior as a shield." Her eyes widened indignant. "Hannah!" I kept going. "And she nearly got away with all of it because you can't bear to admit she's not the victim in every story." Linda's mouth clamped shut as if I had slapped her. My father swallowed hard, looking between us. "What happens now?" he whispered. I showed him the written confession Emily had agreed to earlier, trembling hands, signing her own downfall. "She'll be giving this to the police tomorrow," I said. "Her involvement in the forgery, her intent to defraud me, those charges are unavoidable. Whether Derek is charged in the crash will depend on the investigation." My father nodded slowly, grief deepening the lines in his face. He blinked back tears. "I'm so sorry, Hannah. I should have seen it. I should have stopped it." "You couldn't," I said softly. "You don't stop someone like Emily. You just stop enabling her." He let out a strangled breath. Linda, for the first time in years, didn't defend Emily. She stared at the documents, her expression cracking at the edges. "I didn't know she'd go this far," she whispered. "I thought she just needed support." "She needed accountability," I corrected. "But support is easier, isn't it? Support means you don't have to confront the truth." Silence hung between us, heavy and raw. Finally, my father reached across the table and took my hand. "Whatever you need from us," he said, voice trembling. "We're here now." It was the closest thing to healing we'd had in years. Not forgiveness, not resolution, but acknowledgement. A beginning. Linda nodded, though her eyes were still troubled, wrestling with the collapse of every story she'd used to justify Emily's behavior. "Does she go to prison?" she whispered. "Maybe," I answered. "She made choices. Now she lives with them." My father bowed his head. "She brought this on herself." Another silence. Then, in a voice so small it barely existed, Linda said, "What happens to the baby?" My chest tightened. "He stays innocent. That's what happens. I'll do what I can for him, but not for her. Not anymore." The room felt different after that, as if the house itself exhaled. Truth had a way of clearing the air, painful, sharp cleansing. Their illusions were gone. Mine were too. And in the space left behind, the consequences finally had room to take shape. The next morning began with a heaviness that was different from grief. Grief is hollow, dull echoing. This was sharper, denser, almost metallic in my chest, the weight of finally stepping into a role I had spent years avoiding. The one person in the family willing to name what everyone else tiptoed around. The one willing to say, "Enough." Emily arrived at the police station just after 10. She wore no makeup, her hair knotted in a messy bun, her clothes wrinkled. For once, she looked exactly like what she was, someone who had run out of armor, someone who knew the world she built was collapsing. I stood beside her at the front desk, holding a sealed envelope containing her confession. She kept wringing her hands, her voice barely audible. "Do you have to be here?" she whispered. "Yes." Emily nodded, swallowing hard. She didn't argue. The officer led us to a small interview room with beige walls and a metal table bolted to the floor. When he asked whether she was here voluntarily, she said yes. Her voice shook. She slid the confession across the table. I watched the officer open it, read the first few paragraphs, and stop, his expression sharpening. Forgery, intent to defraud, false claims of paternity, public misrepresentation, interference with estate distribution, enough felonies to reshape the next decade of her life. The officer looked at her squarely. "Ms. Mercer, do you understand that what you've signed is a statement admitting to multiple crimes?" Emily nodded, tears spilling silently. "Do you understand these charges may be prosecuted?" Another nod. "And do you understand that withholding information regarding an active investigation in your case, the hit and run involving your brother-in-law's death, is itself a criminal offense?" That was when she broke. She sobbed, shoulders shaking so violently the chair rattled. "I didn't know Derek was following him," she choked out. "I didn't know he would." She couldn't finish the sentence. "Would hit him," the officer said plainly. "Would kill him," she cried harder. "I don't know if he meant to," she said through gasps. "He said he just wanted to scare Nathan, make him back off, make him stop interfering with our relationship." When pressed for details, she covered her face with her hands. "Derek hated how Nathan looked at me," she whispered. "Like he saw through me. Like he pitied me." The officer leaned forward. "What did Derek say about the accident?" Emily hesitated. She shook her head. "Ms. Mercer." "What did he say?" Her voice was barely a breath. "He said Nathan darted out, that he couldn't stop in time, that it wasn't his fault." The officer narrowed his eyes. "Did you believe him?" Emily stared at the table. "I don't know anymore." It was the closest she had come to something like honesty. The interview lasted another hour. When it ended, the officers escorted Emily out, not handcuffed, not arrested yet, but no longer shielded by denial. She looked back at me, once her face blotchy and swollen. "I'm sorry, Hannah," she whispered. But apologies were no longer currency she could trade. As she walked away, a detective approached me. "Ms. Mercer, we'll need to speak with you privately." I followed him to another room, smaller, with a single file folder sitting on the table. He opened it and pulled out a print from a traffic camera, the same one Marshall found. Derek's blue pickup, the timestamp, the proximity to the crash. "We've been reviewing the original case," he said. "The hit-and-run driver was never identified. But with this new evidence—" He paused. "It changes things." My pulse thudded in my ears. "Are you saying we're reopening the investigation as a potential vehicular homicide?" My breath hitched. Even when I'd suspected it, hearing it spoken aloud felt like being submerged in cold water. "What about Derek?" I asked. He lifted another page. "Derek Hansen has an existing record: domestic violence, assault, property damage, multiple probation violations. He's also behind on child support. If he becomes a suspect in a homicide, we'll issue a warrant immediately." I nodded, gripping the seat to steady myself. The detective continued gently. "Your sister's cooperation may help her avoid the most serious charges, but she and Derek will both face the legal consequences of their actions." Legal consequences. I repeated those words silently, letting them cool and settle in my mind. For years, consequences were things Emily escaped twisted or redirected. Now they were finally catching up. After leaving the station, I received a text from Marshall. They tracked Derek. He fled the state, headed toward Nevada. Police notified. I stared at the screen, feeling both dread and relief. Derek running didn't prove guilt, but it screamed it loudly. Within 24 hours, a warrant was issued for his arrest. Emily moved into my parents' house temporarily, not because she deserved sanctuary, but because the police wanted her accessible while they determined whether she was complicit beyond the forgery. Linda fussed over her, torn between maternal instinct and the dawning horror of who her daughter had become. My father remained quiet, aging years in a single week. I visited once to check on the baby. Emily hovered nearby, but I didn't speak to her. She didn't try to speak to me either. Shame had finally accomplished what reason never could. It silenced her. 3 days later, police found Derek's truck abandoned outside a bar near the Nevada border. He was arrested in a motel 2 blocks away, drunk, belligerent, and ranting about how he was being set up. When they searched his truck, they found damage consistent with a collision, paint transfer, glass particles, enough to justify sending it to forensic analysis, enough to bend the arc of justice toward truth. At home, I sat alone on Nathan's side of the bed, holding the shirt he'd worn on our last normal morning. For the first time, I felt something shift inside me, not closure, not peace, but the first flicker of solidity beneath my feet, something like the beginning of justice. Nathan had deserved so much better, but at least now, finally, the truth was no longer buried, and the people who tried to bury it were finally being dragged into the light. In the end, justice did not arrive with fireworks or dramatic vindication. It came quietly, methodically through hearing statements, forensic reports, and courtroom schedules that stretched across months, like a slow, deliberate unspooling of everything Emily and Derek had tried to twist into a lie. The system was not fast, but it was thorough, and in its steadiness, I found something I had not felt since long before Nathan died, a sense of ground beneath my feet. The first official blow landed 3 weeks after Derek's arrest. The district attorney called to inform me that forensic analysis of his truck confirmed damage consistent with striking Nathan's car, the pattern of the denting, the paint transfer that matched Nathan's vehicle, the shattering of the headlight, and the fact that Derek had repaired the front bumper shortly after the crash, a repair done sloppily, documented by a mechanic who later testified. He found it strange Derek insisted on paying cash and declined a receipt. The DA's voice was steady. "We believe we can pursue vehicular homicide." Hearing those words out loud stole the breath from my chest, not because I was surprised, but because it meant someone outside myself finally recognized the truth I'd been carrying like a stone in my ribs. Emily's legal fate unfolded on a parallel track. She faced charges for forging the will, attempting to defraud me, falsifying estate documents, and presenting fraudulent claims in a public setting. When paired with her cooperation in Derek's case, the DA was willing to consider a plea agreement, but nothing that exempted her from consequences. Ultimately, she accepted a deal: 18 months of probation, mandatory therapy, financial oversight, community service, and a formal legal record documenting her crimes. No jail time, but no clean slate either. A scar on her life as permanent as the one she carved into mine. My parents' reactions were a study in contrasts. My father grew quieter, taking responsibility for the years he spent avoiding conflict, pretending Emily's storms were just weather patterns instead of warnings. Linda, however, wrestled visibly with the truth, still trying to reconcile the daughter she loved with the woman now bound by court orders, and yet even she could no longer deny the reality in front of her. When the sentencing hearing concluded, she hugged me tightly, not to absolve Emily, but because she finally understood what it felt like to stand between Emily's actions and their consequences. The baby, my nephew, remained the only innocent soul in the wreckage. With Derek imprisoned and Emily on probation, the court sought a stable caregiver for him during the months Emily attended mandatory therapy and financial rehabilitation. When the judge asked whether I would be willing to act as his temporary guardian, I felt something inside me soften. Fragile, but real. "Yes," I said, because the sins of adults should never imprison a child. That decision became a pivot point. The baby brought a strange, unexpected warmth into my home. The first time he giggled in my living room, something in me cracked softly, tenderly, like ice thawing. Nathan would have adored him. I told him that sometimes whispering it into the quiet evenings when grief felt like both a memory and a companion. Meanwhile, the civil proceedings regarding Nathan's estate were simple, almost anticlimactic. Carter Brooks presented the real will. The court reviewed the documents. Emily's forged will was tossed aside like the flimsy lie it was. Everything Nathan intended for me remained intact, and in a symbolic gesture that felt like a turning point, I established a scholarship fund in Nathan's name, one dedicated to supporting young people seeking careers in public safety, inspired by the responders who tried to save him. It felt like breathing again, like purpose. Emily and I did not return to being sisters, not the version of sisters I once imagined we could be, but we occupied a new, quieter space, a space defined by boundaries I enforced without apology. She visited her son weekly under supervision. She attended therapy sessions. She worked a part-time administrative job arranged through a program for individuals rebuilding after criminal convictions. She no longer asked for money. She no longer played the victim. She no longer tried to twist the air in the room to center herself. And sometimes, only sometimes, I saw a glimmer of someone who knew she had stepped too far into darkness and was trying shakily to crawl back out. As for Derek, his trial moved forward. The evidence was strong. His history painted a pattern of escalating violence. Emily's testimony placed him near the scene with motive and intent. The jury deliberated less than a day. Guilty. Vehicular homicide, 15 years. When the verdict was read, I did not feel joy. I felt gravity. Justice is not sweetness. Justice is weight. It is the settling of truth into the cracks left by lies, filling the empty spaces with something solid enough to stand on. The day after the verdict, I visited Nathan's gravesite. I brought fresh flowers. I brought the scholarship paperwork, and I brought a small knitted blanket the baby had slept with the night before, its edges worn from tiny hands. I sat beside the headstone, letting the breeze lift strands of hair from my face. The cemetery was quiet, peaceful, in a way my life had not been for a long time. I told Nathan everything, not because he needed to hear it, but because I needed to say it. I told him about the justice, the accountability, the baby, my healing, my strength. And finally, I said the words I had been afraid to admit even to myself. I'm going to be okay. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. When I stood to leave, the wind caught the leaves of the oak tree above, and for the first time, the sound didn't remind me of endings. It reminded me of turning pages, of new chapters, of life continuing not in spite of tragedy, but shaped by it. Nathan had prepared me for a storm I didn't know was coming. Now I was learning how to live in the sunlight again. And as I walked back to the car, the baby's blanket tucked gently under my arm, I realized something simple and true. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by who protects you when the world falls apart. And I was finally blessedly learning how to choose my family for myself.